So welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As this is the first meeting of this committee since the recent elections, I'd just like to take this opportunity to give everyone the chance to introduce themselves to each other. And I'd like to start with Damien, please.
Thank you. My name is Damien Buckley, Democratic Services Officer. I'll be taking the notice today.
Kerry Knight, Councillor for Melton West.
John MacDonald, Councillor for Wixton South.
Lynn Danks for Roseley and Mount Sorrel.
Kane Crook, Councillor for Glenfield, Clevy Maxlode, NFE.
Tim Robinson, County Councillor for Braunston.
Tim Brown, one of two Assistant Directors within Children's Services.
Sharon Cook, the other Assistant Director in Children's Services.
Morning, good afternoon, sorry, Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services.
I'm Charles Purkesley, I'm the County Councillor for Castle Donington and Kegworth, and I'm also the lead member for Children and Family Services.
Afternoon everybody, I'm Craig Smith, I'm the local member for the Colville North Division.
Hello everyone, I'm James Poland, County Councillor for Syston Foss. I'm actually subbing today for Deborah Taylor, and Brenda Seaton, who's on this committee. She's asked me to pass on her apologies for lateness. She is on her way, she'll be about 20 minutes, and as I say, she'll be here shortly.
Hello, I'm David Page. I'm the County Councillor for Market Harborough West and Foxton.
Michael Charlesworth, Councillor for East Wixton.
Thank you. We also have some members of this committee online today, so I'd just like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves as well. Mrs. Shoyer?
It's Miss Shoyer. Hello, Carolyn Shoyer. I'm the Dawson Director of Education for the Church of England, co-opted member.
And I'll be chairing today's meeting. My name's Mr. Mark Balls. I'm County Councillor for Mallory, so thank you very much. As usual, this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live for the public. For those not able to watch live, this webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. I have received some apologies today, firstly for Miss Anne Pendlebury, for Mrs. Deborah Taylor, and from one of the parent governor representatives, that's Adina Mujrataj. Mr. Poland is present and is substituting for Mrs. Taylor. Before we begin, please can I remind everyone to only turn on their microphones when you wish or are invited to speak. As this is the first meeting of the term, it would be useful for members to introduce themselves, so thank you for doing that. Hopefully we are all familiar now with each other in the room. So if we can move on now to item agenda number 1. The first item is the appointment of chairman. Members are asked to note that I have been appointed chairman of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee in accordance with Rule 6A of the Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rules, Part 4E of the County Council's Constitution. Do I have to? Perfect. Item number 2, thank you very much. So moving on to item number 2, which is the appointment of the Vice Chairman. Can I ask for nominations of the position of Vice Chairman, please? Mr. Piper.
Hi, I'd like to propose Councillor Danks as Vice Chairman of this committee.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose Mrs. Deborah Taylor. Obviously, she's led the department now for several years, and don't think there's anybody more qualified. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder, first of all, for Mr. Piper's? Thank you very much.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And for Mr. Smith's proposal?
I'll second Deborah Taylor's nomination.
Thank you. Due to there being more than one nomination, there will now be a secret ballot administered by the Democratic Service Officer.
Okay, thanks for your patience, everybody. I can confirm that Mrs. Danks has received 6 votes, Mrs. Taylor has received 4 votes, and there was 1 abstention. So I can confirm that Mrs. Danks has been elected as the Deputy Vice Chair, of the committee until the council year in the end of the council year in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item number 3. The next item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of March 2025. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Do we have a seconder? Thank you. And now item number 4, and that is question time. We have received a written question from Mrs. Susan Whitting. The question and my response have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. There has also been published to the council's website for public information. I would like to remind members that there is to be no discussion held on this. Mrs. Whitting is present at this meeting, and I'd invite you to ask a supplementary question if you have one. I would remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the response you have been given and should not raise any new issues.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mrs. Susan Whiting, known as Sue Whiting, and I have been coming to this committee for 20 years. I am a little puzzled by the 49% of mediation resulted in an EHCP being issued or an education healthcare need assessment undertaken. Is it possible to have the actual number that this refers to, please, for clarification? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Whiting. I will now ask the officers whether they're able to respond.
Yes, thank you, and apologies, Mrs. Whiting, for not being clearer in the original response. So the 49% of mediations that resulted in an EHCP being issued refers to 55 of them, of the ones that are conceded. So, sorry, I'll start from the beginning. There were 112 appealed. 57 of those appeals were upheld, so essentially agreed with the local authority, but there were 55 that were conceded, so that meant that we then had to move them either to an education, health and care plan, or they're being assessed at the moment. So of the 55, they're either already issued as plans or they are going through the assessment process. I hope that clarifies it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Whiting. You are now welcome to remain in the meeting or you're free to leave. Thank you. So item number 5 is question asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I'm not aware of any questions from members. So on to item 6. There are no urgent items. Item 7 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare?
I'm just for point of clarity, until recently I was a governor at Welland Park Academy, and my 2 children currently are in attendance at that school.
Thank you very much. And myself, I'm a governor at New Bolverden Primary School, and I have a daughter there as well. Thank you. Item number 8, declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? Thank you. Item number 9, I've not been made aware of any petitions to this committee. Thank you. So item number 10, which is our first substantive item today. This report is on school place planning and admissions, can be found on pages 11 to 22. Tim Brown, Assistant Director of Education, Send and Inclusion, will present this report. Please go ahead.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. I'll just give a brief overview of the report, and I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end. But essentially, this report provides an update on the processes and the work of the school admissions and school organisation teams. And in terms of the general context, local authorities have a statutory duty to ensure there is sufficient supply of local school places for their families in the area, which provide a diversity of provision and opportunity for families to express a preference for a school place. We also have responsibility for primary admissions with the National Offer Day being the 16th of April each year, or the next working day if it's not a working day. I should say over the last 4 years, we've seen an increasing percentage of parents receiving one of their preferred schools, and that reached 99.5% this year. We also have responsibility for secondary admissions, with the National Offer Day being the 1st of March or the next working day. And this year, I'm pleased to say that 98% of fans received an offer at one of their preferred schools, again showing an upward trend over the last 4 years. It's worth noting that pupil numbers have changed significantly over recent years, with the birth rate picking up during 2007 to 13. They've now fallen back again, with the number of primary age children reducing in the lower year groups. But these cohorts are now working through the school system and increase further as a result of inward migration across the county, and they're pushing through to secondary and will shortly impact post-16 in a greater way. But the smaller cohorts in the lower primary school years are presenting some challenges for pupil sustainability, especially in those rural areas where those birth rates are remaining low and no increases in numbers being forecast over the forecast period. As a result of that, we're undertaking detailed work to ensure sustainability of our school system across these areas and across the system as a whole, whether they be academies or maintain local authority schools. Secondary numbers will increase through to 28-29 in the current forecasting, with a number of schemes being in place to expand and enlarge secondary provision in areas across the county. Although there are currently sufficient secondary places within Leicestershire, they are not always evenly distributed across the system, which means it can be challenging for parents as they move in during the course of the academic year to find places which are immediately local to their housing. It's probably worth mentioning there are two main sources of funding for additional places. Firstly, the Department for Education provides a basic need funding grant on an annual basis based on our pupil return numbers to them. And we also secure what we call Section 106 developer contributions, where planning obligations require developers to provide funding for local infrastructure requirements, and one of those are school places, as well as community centres, roads, and so on and so forth. We are presented with some difficulties at the moment because the construction costs of new provision has escalated quite significantly, and when we're looking at those schemes where they were originally forecast to cost a certain amount some years ago, it does provide some sort of funding gap, which we're currently working on and working across the system to address those concerns. But at the moment, we do have adequate school places across primary and secondary, and there will have to be some rationalisation of our primary provision over the next few years. But I hope that gives a brief overview, but very happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. I'd like to invite Mr. Pugsley as lead member. Would you like to add anything at the moment?
I would. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I'm very pleased to see the admission system performing at such a high level. As was mentioned, over 95% of children have secured their first preference school, and over 99% have received one of their preferences. This demonstrates the strength of our policies on school-based planning and the robust execution of those policies by the department. It's great to see the department planning ahead with a clear strategy. As was mentioned, nearly 5,000 new school places are being delivered through the capital programme, including a significant number for children with SEND. In my view, the way the department is operating is both effective and necessary, particularly as we respond to falling birth rates in some areas and growing demand at secondary level in others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pugsley. I'd like to invite members now to ask questions. Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. And I'd just like to congratulate the entire department. It's been a pleasure working with you for the last 4 years. You rightly deserved outstanding, and looking at these stats year upon year, getting better and better, it just shows what an efficient council and an efficient department you are. So it's been great to support you. I hope the new administration support you exactly the same level, and good luck for the future. Thank you.
Mr. Piper, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may refer to your report, items 17, 18 and 19, we're talking about the number of transfer and the allocations. As has been said, the
the idea of 95.5%, sorry, 99.5% of preferred schools is indeed incredible. One of the things which I wasn't quite not happy about, but confused more about, was the fact that the total number of applications, first-time admissions, tended to go down. It tended to. Infant to junior schools did go down, but you had a 30% rise in 2025 in secondary transfers. Now, you mentioned the increase in birth rate between 2007 and 2013, and I would have thought that had that been influencing there, you might have seen it in some of the earlier years as well, because 2007, you're talking about maybe 11-year-olds that would be coming out about 2018. So I would have expected from what you said to have seen a gradual increase instead of a slow down, and then a sudden increase in 1 year. Is there any rationale for that?
Yes, a really good question. Thank you. There's a number of factors at play here. We've seen in the last 2 years, it's been the highest transfer into secondary provision across the country, and that's been reflected locally as well. But what we've also, so you've seen that primary bowls going through to secondary. What we've also seen is a reduction in the number of late applications. So you've seen those families applying on time, so they get included within the bulk of the initial allocation, which hasn't happened quite to the extent that we've experienced this year and over the last couple of years. We also suspect, but we can't evidence this, that there's a growing number of families that may have gone into the independent sector, but with the changes happening there, they are opting for maintained provision within the local area. And we've also seen a year-on-year strong inward migration to Leicestershire from our neighbours and from more broadly across the country. But I suspect also that's a result of some local fluctuations in the popularity of Leicestershire schools, and the increase in popularity, but then a reduction in popularity of our neighbouring authority schools as well. So all those factors play into creating quite a complex picture for admissions, but I suspect that's why we've seen the changes we have.
It's a big increase if you're not expecting it, and you've got to be complimented on managing such a surprising increase so well.
Thank you. Ms. Scheuer, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tim, for the report and colleagues. I have a couple of questions arising from schools, particularly primary schools, as they are seeking to manage the situation vis-à-vis falling birth rates, and they're working to ensure that they're offering the right number of places, and in some cases, in order to try and manage risk around deficits, are looking either to reduce PAN or indeed hold to operational capacity, and are sometimes finding those discussions with the admissions team can be quite difficult and quite challenging. I'm just wondering what we might be what you and your team might be able to do to kind of smooth that process out, so that primary schools can make the changes they need in order to maintain balanced budgets, whilst of course recognising the local authorities' statutory obligations, particularly in line with the admissions code. Thank you.
Thank you. A really good question. Thank you. So we are currently undertaking a major piece of work looking at the place planning implications across the county and how they all interact with each other, whether they be maintained schools, academies, or Church of England schools. And that work will result in a new place planning strategy. And what we'll be doing in the autumn is having discussions with local areas and within our school planning areas to determine what arrangements need to take place in each of those areas, which will need to be very bespoke, depending on what the current circumstances are. And that will, I suspect, as you quite rightly say, have some discussions around changing the PANs of schools, the published admission numbers, but also around looking at whether we need to merge schools or whether we need to take additional places out of the system in one way or another. But we'll be having very detailed conversations with local communities around that once we've formulated our place planning strategy, and that will be finished during the course of the summer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much. Yeah, again, the stats that we see in point 17, their first time admissions, is to be congratulated. I mean, I declare an interest. My youngest son has gone through this process this year, and thankfully he got his first choice along with 95% of everyone else that applied. In terms of looking down the list, though, obviously, we are talking with really quite small numbers, especially when we get to sort of 3, 4, and 5 preference. But what, generally speaking, are the reasons for that? Do they just happen to live in massively in-demand areas? Is there other reasons for that? And if there are areas that are particularly in demand, are we therefore finding a lot of the people from sort of 4th and 5th preference, 3rd, 4th, and 5th are in the same area? And if so, what is that area?
Again, a really good question. It's probably worth me saying that place planning really is an art, not a science. So you're looking at a range of different factors that influence the overarching picture. But what we often find is that, and we always encourage parents to express a preference for the maximum number of schools they can. And where parents don't get a preference, it's often because they've only expressed a single preference or haven't expressed any preferences at all. Or where there is, quite rightly, there's some areas of high demand where we look towards expanding provision in those areas so that there is more capacity. Of course, that isn't always possible because changing infrastructure does take time. But also we have to be mindful around the other schools within a local area where there is a populous or a more popular school at a particular time, because if you increase the numbers at that school, you cause viability issues at a neighbouring school as well. So it's quite a complex picture. We always try and balance all of those factors at the same time. And we'll be looking to see what the picture is going to be over the next 5 years in order to develop our place planning strategy and to make sure we're rationalising or expanding schools as we need to, based on the demand in particular areas going forward.
Thank you very much for that. Just to clarify my understanding then, if that's okay. So in order to sort of help with viability issues sort of in the short, medium term, would it be the case that you might not always get your first preference, even if there was a space, because it might affect viability issues elsewhere, or have I misunderstood what you said?
No, we will always allocate places based on the admission criteria, which is laid out in the admissions code of practice, or it's laid out in the admissions policy that we adopt, but are supported by the admissions code of practice. So we're not allowed to keep spaces vacant at any point. We will always allocate places based on preference wherever possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of questions. One's around planning the future. We see a lot of big developments around the area now. Presumably the planning department has the conversation with developers and then come to you in terms of educational requirements. You've got all the data, which I imagine you feedback, and then that determines whether it's additions to existing schools or in fact new schools, which tend to be a 210 size standard. I'm just wondering how that works. Who decides whether there's capacity at existing, mainly primaries, for extra classrooms, or whether it actually needs a new school? And have you gone so far ahead? I mean, I think my example in my patch is 2029, the next primary school. Development be done and finished well before then, I should imagine. Will that still go ahead?
So again, a really good question. One of the issues that we always have to address is that developers are always very keen for a squeaky new primary school because it goes down well with people buying houses in the area. But we've got to make sure that we're looking at the whole school system, and we'll make a decision based on what we expect the forecasted growth to be within a particular school planning area, and that includes taking into account the pupil yield from developments as they unfold. And we've got to also be very careful that we if we do decide to build a new school because that's the right thing to do for families in the area, that we don't open it in a way which causes issues to neighbouring schools and causes their viability issues. So we will always limit the growth of a new school, so there's enough capacity within a local area for the new development, but also so that it doesn't threaten the viability of neighbouring schools, because otherwise those places which are meant for a particular development will be filled from parents elsewhere as well. So it's always a discussion within a local school planning area on which is the best course of action. But you're quite right, we would not build a school less than 240 places these days. My preference would be to build what we call a 3-form entry school, so 360 places. And in addition to a new secondary schools, 900 places probably is the smallest I want to build these days. Any less than that causes viability issues going forward, and particularly as you start looking at the sixth forms of those numbers of places as well. So it's making sure you're bringing all those factors into account as you develop the local plans.
Okay, that's very helpful. If I just supplementary to that, I mean, it mentions in there about the ongoing costs always increasing and getting even more expensive, and that liability will then fall back on the developer, who will be expected to cover. I mean, 4 years away from now, was that cost factor built in when that school was planned? And my second question is, when does a school, and I imagine mainly rural school, when does a school become unviable in terms of pupil numbers, that you have to make that awful decision to say, you know, I mean, there must be a number where that school no longer becomes workable, sadly.
Really giving my run for money today, aren't you? So that's another really good question. There's no one single answer, if I'm honest, because I've seen schools of as low as 6 running because it's the right thing for that community. But I've seen schools as much as 50 close because it's the wrong thing for that community and the system generally. So that's why we break the county into school planning areas and make very individual bespoke decisions, so that we are adapting them to the local community and we're listening to the voices of the local community as well. So there's a lot of nuances there, I think. In terms of section 106, we have what we call a pupil yield ratio, which determines how much money developers pay. And that's usually fixed at the point of the development being, the planning application being submitted and approved. If there is growth factor between then and when the school's built, that does cause issues. But we are reviewing and have reviewed our pupil yield ratio because we found that has shifted over time, so that we can make sure we've got the right amount of funding coming from developers. Where there is a shortfall, we would look towards using our basic need funding, section 106 from a broader area. So we try and make sure that they are more broad in their description of what can be provided, and also look towards what the County Council's capital programme could support as well as part of that development.
Just quickly, Chair. So there's no built-in inflation against these costs?
We try and factor that in, but it's unusual to have it as part of the original planning application. Ted, I don't know if you want to say any more about that.
Yeah, well, it depends. So the policy, the planning obligations policy, is looking at that is being. It's mentioned in here that the council, the planning obligations policy, looking at trying to make those decisions closer to the time of the school being built, which will address that to some extent.
Mr. Page, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may. First thing I want to say is congratulations on that Ofsted rating. It's a very hard thing to achieve, and I think you should be very proud. First question I've got is linked to the previous question that was asked, and that's regarding secondary schools. Now, in Market Harborough, we've got 2 excellent schools, Robert Smythe and one in Park Academy. And you've kind of given some of the answers to how you assess planning growth. But I'm interested to know whether you were consulted in the plans published by Harbour District Council. And within that, actually, this authority described those plans as premature and unsound and without evidence in respect to infrastructure to support it. They wanted to have, as part of those plans, a brand new secondary school. And I'd like to know whether that is something that we're seriously considering, and whether that will actually impact the growth plans for both
of the two established schools in town, and what would actually be the deciding factors in your mind for that to proceed?
So as part of any local plan, we would be fully consulted on those arrangements, and we would look towards looking at the size of the development and using our pupil yield ratios to determine whether a new secondary school were the right course of action. Again, taking into account the impact upon other neighbouring schools as well. I mean, it's always very tricky, so you've got to make sure you maintain the viability of the entire system, taking into account, for example, in Leicestershire, we've got the primary numbers dropping off and then going through to secondary, and that will hit secondary, that reduction in the years to come. So it's making sure that we are absolutely cognizant of that, but at the same time, making sure that families don't have to travel outside of the local area to access a school place as far as possible. So there's a multifaceted number of factors you take into account. We may make decisions in the here and now based on what we know, but we'd also review those decisions nearer the time to make sure it is responsive to changing patterns of identified need across any local area. And again, which is why when we look at school planning areas, they're much smaller than district areas and wider planning areas, because it's just too difficult to make decisions across a local borough council, for example, or any of the districts. So it is making sure they are, on the whole, as responsive to change patterns of identified needs as we can be, but it's also making sure that they are adapting to what's happening in the local system as well. That's a bit of a politician's answer in some ways, I suppose, because there are a number of factors you can't take into account when you're making those decisions at an earlier stage. For example, if one of the schools in the local area becomes Ofsted, reducing their Ofsted rating becomes inadequate, you'll see a real shift in the patterns of admissions. So parents will want to go across the border to other schools, or they may want to go in border across to other schools, but that will cause a real problem in that particular planning area. So we need to make sure we're responsive to that. And that's part of our statutory duty, actually, is to make sure we are being responsive to those particular demands from parents as well. But I should also say at this point that people often talk about school choice. It is a school preference, not a school choice. So it's not always possible to give the parents their choice of school. We will always do it as far as possible in terms of their preference. But so there's a number of different factors operating at any point in that. But the key is the local plan is consulted on widely, and we'll make sure we based our decisions on the local intelligence and the emerging intelligence at the time of build.
Another question, if I may, just changing tack slightly, and this is to do with section 20, page 14, under midterm in year admissions. Do we keep any kind of data on the causes of midterm admissions? And you're nodding your head there, that's good. The reason why I'm asking is because obviously one of those causes is probably down to bullying in schools, where parents want to switch to another school. And as we have a safeguarding responsibility, as do the schools, I just wanted to check to see what we do in those circumstances, how schools report to you on those things and what we do about it. I often think that some of the schools actually do shuffle these problems, and I want to make sure that actually that we are scrutinising that very carefully, and I'm seeing some knowing looks here, so you're obviously doing that, so I'll allow you to answer the question.
Thank you. No, a really good and really important question, actually. We make sure that we've got spare capacity in the system. The National Audit Office recommends between 5 and 10% slack in the system, so parents can move around where they need to. We're also very much aware that some schools may, what we call off-roll is the terminology that's used by the government. And where we see that happening, we have an inclusion team which will go in and challenge those schools and support those families, either to make sure they're not being off-rolled or they are able to access alternative places within their local community as far as possible. And we also have in place what we call a fair access panel for those families whose children are finding it difficult to access an alternative school place, or indeed a school place if they're moving in for a variety of different reasons. But yes, that's one of our highest priority areas to monitor and track and challenge schools where it's happening.
Thank you very much. I'd like to echo the congratulations to officers for this report. It's great actually in this first meeting to get an overview of the service and see how it's performing. So thank you for that. I do have one question myself very quickly. At 38, the basic needs funding drops by about a quarter, and you've already mentioned how that might be used to supplement other funding pots. What impact will that have to service delivery, do you think?
We are currently reviewing the basic need allocation because we don't believe it's adequate to service our needs going forward. There is an issue that the formula has just recently changed. And just last night, actually, the funding guidance was issued by the Department for Education. So we're currently scrutinising that to determine whether or not there are any adverse implications for Leicestershire, and we'll be approaching the government if that is the case. The other aspect is you can access additional funding through another route via the Department for Education if you regard the allocation to be inappropriate and too low to meet your basic need, and that will be under consideration once we've analysed the current basic need funding arrangements.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. If there are no more questions. Brilliant. So thank you. So we're going to move on to item number 11. And this is a report on Leicestershire County Council's responsibility to children in care. And it can be found on pages 23 to 28 of the agenda. Sharon Cook, Assistant Director, Targeted Early Help and Children's Social Care, will present this report alongside Kelda Clare, Head of Service Children in Care and Care Leavers, who is joining us today. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and delighted to present this report to the committee. I'll give an overview of the report, and Kelda and I are happy to take any questions that members may have. So the purpose of the report is to provide the committee with an overview of the local authority's duties and responsibilities to all of our children in care. This includes children seeking asylum. So paragraph 2 and 3 of the report outlines for the committee the policy and legislative framework in which we work. The functions and duties of the local authority to all our children in care are outlined very clearly in the Children Act 1989 and associated regulations and guidance that have been published since that time. Another key document for committee to be aware of is our corporate parenting strategy. So that was last one was agreed in 2022 and runs until the end of this year. And that outlines our commitment and principles to all children in care and care leavers. And they are the principles as set in legislation set out in the Children and Social Work Act of 2017. So as way of a background, we have over 700 children who are in our care. Those children sit across a number of our services. So for those children who have recently come into our care, and we are still working with them to look at their long-term plan, which may be to return home to either immediate family or extended family, then they are supported in our family safeguarding teams, and they include children where the authority may be going to court and taking proceedings for a child to be in care, or they could be children where the family have asked voluntarily for their child to be looked after. Once a child has a long-term plan to be in our care, they move into our children in care services where they receive support for the duration of the time they're in care and support them until they become care leavers. Another group of children who are children in care where adoption is the plan are supported in our adoption services. So it's just to give you an overview of where that best support comes for our children. And this does include children who are in care who are also disabled children. So paragraph 5 talks about our promise to children in care. So that was a promise that was launched in 2019, was signed up to by key members of the local authority and partner agencies about our aspiration, ambition for all children in care and how we fulfil our responsibilities and duties as corporate parents to do the very best for our children as we would for any of our children. Paragraph 6 onwards gives the overview of the Ofsted inspection that's been referred to previously in the meeting. So in April 24, the Local Authority Children's Services Ofsted inspection of services rated us to be outstanding, and for our children in care, outstanding. And paragraph 6 that I won't read out to you, but gives you within that report some of the really key feedback from Ofsted about what they saw and what they found for our children. We work across the service to a continuous improvement plan that's called Achieving Excellence Through Purposeful Practice. This is where we are clear around our values and behaviours of how we deliver services, what we expect from staff who come to work for us in the authority, but also what children and families who are receiving support from us can expect to experience. So paragraph 8, as of the end of April when the report was prepared, we had 717 children in care. That includes, as I said earlier, those children who are seeking asylum, and the details and some of the figures have been provided in the report about the breakdown of those children. Paragraph 9 onwards gives the service overview. So for those children in long-term care who are supported via our Children in Care service, the service is made up of 4 teams, each has a team manager, and they, with their social workers and alternatively qualified staff, support all of our children via an individual care plan that each child has. Paragraph 12 talks about the service manager for care leavers and unaccompanied asylum seeking children, as well as the service manager for children in care, simply because under the service manager for care leavers and unaccompanied children, there are 2 children in care teams who specialise in working with unaccompanied young people, and working with them, we have responsibilities to do age assessments for those children. We are working with children who have left very traumatic, often very traumatic circumstances in their own countries, and on the journey over to the UK have experienced some really traumatic and disturbing things and experiences. So they are a team who specialise in supporting that group of young people. So our service priorities are outlined in paragraph 13 to 17. It talks about our commitment to ensuring that our children have and experience a real sense of belonging. So they have that stability, they know who will be looking after them, who will be taking care of them, who are the people that will keep them safe and they can rely on for their childhood. So that is a really key piece of work that's undertaken by the service. And it's also about children knowing their history as well as their current experiences. So we call that Life Story Works. That's really about providing our children with those memories and information that for a child that remains at home with their parents is always kept for them. Sometimes our children in care don't have that because of the circumstances that have led to them coming into care. So there is a clear piece of work that's done, creating that, taking time to find out those really important things that have happened for our children. It's paragraph 15, it's important to note that over time and over the years, I think the complexity of need of our children in care has grown, and I would want the committee to be aware of the complex risk situations that we deal with and we are supporting our children through, and the need for us to work with partner agencies, especially in health and education, to minimise those risks to children. Paragraph 18 onwards talks about the service delivery over the past 12 months, where we've done some of the work that I've explained about understanding a child's culture and understanding where they've been and the life story work. And paragraph 20 to 21 takes you through how we create and develop that sense of belonging that I've referred to. We do, with our children who have a plan for long-term care, always work to improve, strengthen, identify their networks, their local networks, and where possible, those links back to their family. So because sadly a family weren't able to care for a child when they were 10, doesn't mean that by the time the child's 15 that progress may have been made, and with support that child could return to their family, or they could at least have really meaningful relationships with them. So there's a lot of work that's undertaken in the service regarding that. And in paragraph 23, we've outlined the rehabilitation home and that link that we work with. That includes in 24 what we call family time. So that's about working with those birth parents to ensure, if possible, those children can return home. We've outlined in paragraph 26 to 28 the age assessment. So those age assessments are completed for children who are unaccompanied children who arrive in the UK, where the Home Office have very clear guidance and legislation that we work to, where an age assessment has to be completed to determine the age of whether they're a child or an adult. So that is a key piece of work, and that's outlined for you and for the committee in paragraph 26 to 28. And 29 talks about the care plans that I mentioned earlier. So every child, every single child that's in our care has a clear care plan that outlines what we're going to do, what their carers will do, what the young person will do, what schools will do, everything that needs to happen to give them that security and support during their time in care. So that I appreciate that's an overview of a very complex situation and structure, but I'm happy to take any questions, and obviously Keldra as head of service is here also to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll open up now to Mr. Pugsley if he has any comments on the report.
Thank you, Chair. It's really encouraging to see such strong indicators of consistency within the care system, with all children currently having up-to-date plans and 90% of health and dental checks being completed on time. That level of baseline reliability that we have is essential. It's also clear that the department isn't just meeting its core responsibilities, but is taking a thoughtful approach to what good, lasting outcomes look like for the children that we have in care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members' questions. Ms. Shawyer, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, thank you, Sharon and team, for that really helpful and full report. I've been working with school and multi-academy trust leaders quite a bit recently, exploring some of the issues around where children with SEND may or may not be in a position to access the disabled children's social care team. I was in my reading and research around this issue. I know the Law Commission published a consultation paper at the back end of 24, and it talked about, for example, we know a lot more about conditions like autism, and many more children are now recognised as neurodivergent, but some things haven't really changed. Disabled children who need help from social services often have serious and complex needs. The person asking for the help will usually be the child's parent or carer. In practice, this is often their mother, who may be exhausted from juggling their caring responsibilities around work and looking after the child's siblings. The person deciding whether to provide help, and if so, what kind of help to provide, will often be a busy social worker with a large caseload to manage. And I just was really interested in your reflections on that, Sharon, around how accessible is the disabled children's team to families with who are supporting disabled children with complex needs in order to access that really important, vital, long-term care that where they are identified as a child in need, but not via not through child protection, but through the fact that they are disabled. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we can probably pick the question up in a bit more detail. It's not obviously the children that you describe are not children who are in our care. So the questions slightly.
Sorry, Jane, but it talks about the Disabled Children's Service in the report. That's why if that's a different service, then completely, absolutely happy to take.
Yeah, sorry. If I just finish, I can let you give a response. So we can definitely come back to you with more detail on that, because the questions you're asking are broader, and so that we can give you a fuller response to it, because I think the questions you're asking are really important questions. However, what Sharon will do is just give an overview of what the Disabled Children's Service does and the role and responsibility of that service.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the reference within the report to the Disabled Children's Service is that some of our children in care are children with a disability. So wanted to be clear that those children are supported in the same way and the same principles as outlined in the paper. Our disabled children's team, and happy to bring to discuss this outside of the committee or to provide more detail, because obviously that's not the detail that we've brought today. That team don't support every child with a disability. So every child with a disability may need additional support. They need that support from a variety of people. They don't always need a social worker to support. So it's not that children with a disability don't get access to that support, but I wouldn't want us to think that every child with a disability automatically needs to have a social worker in their lives supporting them. We concentrate, and rightly concentrate, that support on those children where it's identified via an assessment that they and their families would benefit from social work involvement. But I do want to give the clear message that those children are supported, and are supported by at the right level, whether that's via school or early help services or health services. So I think I've given an overview of what the Disabled Children's team do, but for the committee, I'd be getting into more detail that's not contained within the paper that's focusing on children in care. But I'm happy to pick it up outside of this committee and provide whatever detail is required.
Thank you, Sharon, and apologies for misreading the report there, but that's really helpful. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. And I think that would be of interest to all of us anyway. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Charlesworth.
Yeah, just a quick one, please, Chair, for clarity. Under paragraph 8, it mentions the 717 children in care, 82 seeking asylum, 388 long-term care plans, and 41 with Disabled Children's Service. How do you define the other 206?
Yeah, they are children, apologies. They are the children, as I described earlier. So children, when they first come into care, who are within our family safeguarding service. So we're determining what the long-term plan for those children would be. And apologies, we should have made that clearer in that paragraph. Thank you.
Mr. Page.
Page 24, section 9. You talk about, obviously, the children care service. How many people are actually employed for this critical service? And do you have any vacancies? Not that I'm applying. It's just that obviously you're in demand, and your capacity is finite. And I just wanted to know whether or not we're actually managing to fill all the vacancies that are available, and how you go about that.
So as it states within the report, we have 4 teams within our children in care service, and within that we have 1 senior practitioner and around either 5 or 6 social workers within each team. We currently have recruitment to each vacancy, so we don't have any unheld vacancies, but we do have known ASYEs or apprentices coming into those roles, so they're planned recruitments into those positions. And we've had a real period of stability within the children in care service in terms of recruitment, and seeing those that move on are mainly moving on for career opportunities or career changes that they wish to do. So we have had and particularly within our team manager structure, we've had real stability for a period of time.
Thank you. I'd just add to that, we don't keep vacancies because of the very things you've said. So if somebody is leaving, whilst we recruit a permanent worker, we do employ an agency worker during the time. So we don't leave any gaps. We wouldn't leave a child without an allocated worker.
That's the concern I had, and so that's
Just
expressed.
If I may, just to add to that as well, on your point around the increasing number of children that come into our care, part of the challenge within children's services is the pressure on budgets. Obviously, we have to and we'll always allocate a social worker to children who come into our care. So part of our kind of growth projections or demand projections do look at the number of social workers we will need going forward as well, and you'll see that reflected in the MTFS around our projection of the growth in numbers of children that are coming into our care, and therefore the number of social workers that we will need to support. So we're constantly kind of looking ahead to make sure that we've got the right resource in place to support children, or to have the right number of social workers on top of then the recruitment that colleagues have outlined.
Chair, just one more question on that then. So it's a very intense area, and I recognise the pressures that must be on the team to do the job they do. So I'm interested to know how we safeguard our team members to make sure that their well-being is also looked after, because the pressures must be incredibly, big. So I'd be interested to know what measures we put in place to help our teams.
Yeah, I think that is a fair comment, and it's something that's fair to say for the workforce across children's social care and targeted early help. We ensure that all our staff have at least monthly supervision with their supervisor. That is a qualified social worker. That's the supervisor. So they have that monthly supervision where they can talk in detail about their children and their cases. They also have personal supervision that looks at their well-being. We have what we call pods, which are where the teams come together as groups to talk about complex cases and complex issues and share that across the team. We are very mindful of the experience and level of experience of workers. Kelda mentioned our ASYEs. They are our newly qualified social workers. So for the first year in practice, they're referred to as ASYEs. It's an assessment year. They have protected numbers of children that they support. They have additional training from our learning and development team. On top of that, all our staff have an APR, so that's an appraisal every year that looks at what's going well, where there are, if there are any issues or concerns, well-being issues, but also training issues. We have a comprehensive training programme that we deliver, and we have what's known as our practice excellence team, who are experienced workers that are attached to and go out into different areas of our business to support individual workers or groups of workers with particular issues, tricky issues, or doing additional training and support. We observe practice. So we have a breadth of experience or a programme really of what we provide. In addition, we have linked wellbeing workers in the council where people can go and see somebody around their wellbeing. And as a service and department, we fund critical counselling. So if a staff member needs to be referred there because they have either been dealing with the experience of an individual child or a group of children where there's trauma, and that's either impacted on them because of that child or children, or it's brought to the fore things that they've experienced in their own life and background. We provide critical counselling for those staff. So it's independent of managers, but they have that time to actually look at themselves and their well-being.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. This one's just in relation to the UASC children. How do we overcome the language barriers that obviously come through with those problems that present themselves? You've got children moving around the country. I'm presuming that English isn't their first language. So do we have that in-house, or do we obviously buy that in? Thank you.
We do ensure that we commission interpreters and that they have interpreters with them for all important meetings, so that their voice is truly represented and they understand what's happening for them. And we ensure that they go onto ESOL courses so that they're learning English from the first moment of arriving, and we're trying to support them in their knowledge of English and in terms of developing their own language. So we do our best to ensure when they're in supported accommodation that they are often with young people who speak the same language as them, which then supports them in terms of their community and them settling. But yeah, we ensure that there is always interpreters and PAs, so personal advisors who support our children, and social workers will ensure that they will utilise technology available if there isn't an interpreter available for them. Well, that went off.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any further questions? Apologies, Mrs. Knight.
A quick question. You mentioned that you assess unaccompanied children to define whether they are a child or an adult. I'm intrigued to know how you possibly do that.
So there's that going on. So that clearly there's a Merton assessment, and that's a government and court required assessment that needs to be undertaken, and there are specific requirements of that assessment and that includes the questions that are asked, how they are asked, having the right people available, ensuring there's an interpreter. We ensure that our assessments are undertaken within 28 days. We have a specific assessment team that undertake that. So we have specialist workers that are very used to undertaking these assessments. And clearly the evidence is you can't just do it on how a young person looks. So it's not just from how they look. We explore their journey. We explore their genogram, so talking about their family. We talk through experiences that they've had on their journey. We talk about experience that they had back in their country of birth and with their family. And within that, we start to unpick areas of understanding of whether or not we believe that their claimed age is appropriate. And we utilise provision of doubt as well. So there is always a spectrum of doubt that we will apply to a certain age group as well.
Supplementary question. So therefore, if you make an assessment and your assessment then determines that you presume they're an adult, what is the remediation of that you think you've got a child, but then suddenly you've got an adult?
So in the circumstances where we have identified they're an adult, they become the responsibility of the Home Office.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the officers again for bringing the report. It's enlightening, and I think it really helps set the course for the year ahead. So thank you. We're going to move on to item 12 now, which is a report on Leicestershire County Council's responsibility to care leavers. It can be found on pages 29 to 34. Sharon Cook and Kelda Clare will present the report again. Please start when you want.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, some of the detail that's in the report that I hope you've been able to read is the same legislation for our children in care. So at 18, if in care, if in our care at the age of 18, they become legally known as a care leaver. And the legislation that supports our duties and statutory duties and responsibilities to them are set out in the Children Act, but also the Care Leavers regulations from 2010. So those key bits of legislation are actually really clear about, as a local authority and as a corporate parent, we need to support into adulthood those children who have been our children in care. So that information is in detail in paragraph 1 to 5 of the report. Paragraph 6 onwards talks about the number of care leavers. So at the time of this report being prepared at the end of April, we had 498 care leavers. So they are aged 18 to 25. So we, again, within the legislation, we have specific duties and responsibilities to our care leavers up to the age of 21. And then from the age of 21 to 25, there are duties that are still there, but there is an element that obviously, depending on the young person, young adult circumstances, they can choose a bit more about what how they take up those services or not. But there is still a clear responsibility for us. And that paragraph breaks down the ages of our care leavers within those age bands. Our promise I talked about in the earlier report, so that promise about our aspirations are all the same for this group of youngsters, and paragraph 8 takes you through. So we were assessed under Ofsted for our services to care leavers. It was a new judgment in the Ofsted ratings, so we were delighted that we were rated outstanding for our services to care leavers. And the report and paragraph 8 takes you through some of the fabulous feedback that we got for the service that we provide. Paragraph 9 takes you through the number of care leaver teams we have, and then service priorities. So our key service priority outlined in paragraph 10 is about, we want to make sure we support our youngsters so that they grow up to be adults that are able to make important have success in their adult life and contribute to their communities. So our service priorities are very much about how we support those young people to do that, about providing them with the right level of support, ensuring that they're supported into adult education or training or employment. They have the support of a personal advisor, so somebody who can work alongside them and make sure that they are making safer choices and more positive choices in their lives. So paragraph 10 takes you through all the things that we do as a service. One of the things to highlight, there are lots of things in the report. One of the things I would want to bring to your attention is we were really delighted last year when the council made care leavers a protected characteristic. It's something that more authorities are doing, but in Leicestershire, the local authority led the way in identifying and agreeing that our children in care had a protected characteristic. And our care leavers, had protected characteristics. It's something that nationally they're looking at bringing into legislation, but we are delighted that actually, along with our district councils, we made that decision as Leicestershire Local Authority. And the rest of the report takes you through how we manage risks for some of the difficult, risky situations and experiences our children are in, and then some of the key areas and tasks that we undertake around housing, accommodation, health, education and employment. paragraph 18 to 19 talks about some of the financial support that's given, and that is done on an individual basis, part of a plan. We talked about a plan for every child. As a care leaver, it's called a pathway plan, but that's the plan that they devise with their workers and those around them about how best we can support them to move successfully into adulthood. So I think that takes you through an overview of the service. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I'll come to Mr. Pugsley first for any comments.
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing that I'd like to comment on this specific agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members. Mr. Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a good comprehensive report explaining everything. A few questions. Personal advisors, are they employees of the County Council? They are, okay. What happens, and it must happen occasionally when somebody moves to another local authority, do they pick up where we've left off, or do we continue even though it may be some distance away?
Yeah, they are our children. So wherever they live in the country, our staff remain involved and they remain our children.
What would be really nice is to have somebody's journey shown to us. Anonymise it by all means, unless they're willing to be public on that, but it would be really nice to see somebody's positive journey or not so positive journey, you know, let's be open, but it would be nice to see a full journey of somebody through the system and how they've gone on to better things.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Mr. Page, thank you.
Thank you for that really comprehensive report. I'm interested to know whether, certainly for the foreign-born young people that are in our care, whether a very much clearer outcome should be that they have the capability to read, write, and speak English. Now, it's inferred, you've made references to it, but I'd like to see it take a more prominent position actually as an outcome that we're looking to achieve. Surely that's the fundamental for any one of those young people integrating properly into our society and to be successful.
It is, and that's remiss of us not to include it. What I can say is that we are extremely proud of actually the academic achievement of a lot of our unaccompanied young people who go on and actually have a thirst for education, learning the language and being part of the communities. And we've been able to celebrate lots of successes for those young people. But when we come back in the future, we could provide that detail as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Crook, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. So just making sure I understand these figures correctly, you got the 63% in education or employment, but you're still in contact with 97%, so you're still in contact with the majority, the 37% that aren't in education.
So that's against our full cohort of care leavers rather than just against those in employment. So we have 63% of our care leavers, and that's 18 to 21 who are in education, employment or training. And we're in contact with 97% of our whole cohort, so not the remainder of those that are in education, employment or training. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, so out of the 37% not in employment or education, you are still in contact with them?
No, sorry, it's probably the way
cohort. Yeah,
it's probably the way we presented the data. So apologies. The first figure is those care leavers who are in education, employment and training. That's 63%. The second figure is entirely separate. So that's of all of our care leavers. We are in contact with 97% of them. So they're separate figures. We've just not presented it as clearly as possible. So apologies. And then of all of our care leavers, 95% of them are in suitable accommodation. So the figures are all separate from each other.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow on from there, the efforts going forward for the 37% not in education, are we happy we're making good progress on that?
So we have focus from our senior practitioners on those that aren't in education, employment and training. We're engaging in work to look at work experience opportunities, apprenticeship opportunities, and we are developing relationships with other areas such as Leicestershire Cares and Reed, who offer different opportunities for developing CVs, etc., for our care leavers. So we're trying to offer a range of opportunity because some aren't work ready and they need that lower level, and some are work ready, and some of our care leavers are clearly are very aspirational and going on to higher education. So for those outside of it, it's really getting it right for them and working with them, understanding their trauma and which way is the best way to support them into something to support them on that journey. But absolutely, we work really hard to look at all of the opportunities for them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. And just a quick question for myself, and it's around that aspirational element, actually, the grant for universities. How many care leavers have taken that up? Because I think that's a really positive statistic to be sharing publicly.
Don't know the exact figure offhand, but I can absolutely get that to you.
Thank you very much. And just to say, I think care leavers is a bit of a black hole that we don't know much about them externally. So I think the more publicity we can give to this, because I think there's a real need to share positive stories, as Mr. Childer said, because there's lots of good work being done by the care leavers themselves in many cases. So yeah, I'd love to hear those. Thank you. I'd like to move on to item 13 now, which is a report on Families First reforms, which can be found on page 35 to 86. Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services, and Sharon Cook will present the report. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So the report you've got here is to provide you with an overview of the new reforms for children's services. And this is the first time that the detail of this has come to Overview and Scrutiny Commission, although we did make reference to it in a previous report around agency use in children's social care. So in November last year, the government published a policy paper called Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive. And essentially the paper included plans for a really comprehensive reform of children's services across the UK, and committed primarily to keeping families together, but also keeping children safe as well. As a result of this, the Children and Family Wellbeing Bill is, which includes the legislation to support the reforms, is currently moving through Parliament process at the moment, and it's due to reach its final stage later this year. So the Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive paper has got four main objectives, and primarily around making sure that we can support children where it's safe to remain with their families. Where children can't remain with their families, the ambition is to place them with other family members, or known as kinship carers, or with foster carers. The ambition also focused on some concerns around profiteering through children's services, and predominantly around children's homes. And then the fourth objective was around investing in the workforce and really looking at data systems to support the workforce and children as well. So in terms of the work around supporting children to remain with their families, the government is looking to mandate the use of what's called family group decision making. So that's essentially where we pull together a network of people around a family or a child to look at who can best support that family to be successful for the child. It also has included some plans around improving information sharing across agencies. They want to introduce a unique single identifier for children as well. The policy is aiming to strengthen some of the multi-agency input into children's decision-making in child protection teams, and are looking at how we can explore integrated multi-agency child protection teams as well. There's a new duty on safeguarding partners to ensure that education is round the table more solidly, and there is also provisions within the reforms around making sure parents have consent from local authorities to home educate children where there are safeguarding concerns. So quite a significant change being suggested there around home education. And then I know we talked about the corporate parenting duty a number of times today, but the legislation is looking at extending the corporate parenting duty to a range of public bodies, which is really positive. So across housing, across health, education, and employment services, so expanding that corporate parenting duty. The areas around tackling profiteering primarily focus on how we can make sure that those providing care will be held to account for the quality of the homes they provide, and how we can increase the number of good quality homes for our children. And that's going to be done both through legislative changes but also non-legislative changes, with a primary aim to make sure that the children who are in care are in homes that they deserve as well. We have appended the full Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive document for you to have a look at, and it includes all of the measures that are being asked to be implemented across children's services in England at the moment. So in March this year, the government published a policy document which is entitled Families First Partnership Programme Guide, and it's essentially to support the very first wave of reforms that they're expecting us to implement across Leicestershire and across all of children's services. And it covers things like how we are expected to develop the family group conferencing, the multi-agency safeguarding arrangements. The expectation is that this year that we're in now is a continued business as usual alongside developing the new models for delivery, and we'll be expected to have plans in place towards the latter end of this year, ready for delivery from April 26 onwards. The document sets out a really clear importance of working jointly with colleagues, particularly police, health and education, and we're working really closely with police and health colleagues locally and education to make sure that we implement effectively for Leicestershire. The government did give some money. They made £270 million worth of new funding available to implement these reforms. Locally, we've received 1.4 million in Leicestershire to implement the reforms, and are at the moment looking at how we can make best use of that money to implement the reforms most effectively. In paragraphs 13 to 16, we've set out how we have started to look at what it looks like for Leicestershire. We're already making really good progress in the design and starting implementation of the new ways of working. We've undertaken initial scoping of the new legislation to have a look at what's missing, what we need to develop, what we need to do differently. The establishment of our family help service and our family safeguarding teams are a really good starting point that are outlined in the document and an expectation of the document. So it does mean that we're in a strong position going forward, having already established that model. And we know it's successful, and we know that families and children are benefiting from it as well. So I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Pugsley.
Thank you, Chair. Although these reforms are being introduced at a national level, what matters here is how effectively the department in Leicestershire is preparing to respond, and it's clear that the approach being taken is both proactive and well thought through. The early planning around workforce data and partnership working puts us in a really strong position to respond effectively and in a way that builds on good practice already in place locally. I'm confident that the department will continue to focus on what really matters, which is delivering early, meaningful support to families and achieving lasting, stable outcomes for children. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for members, Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for that, Jane. Really thorough. But the one I want to pick up on is number 12, where we talk about the 270 million. Obviously, governments love these big headline figures, and we get a pittance of that at 1.4. Is that actually going to cover the cost in your best guess? Thank you.
So yeah, the 270 million is genuinely new money. So it is additional money that has come in. The 1.4 million allocation for Leicestershire is probably what we were expecting to get, albeit it's never enough, as you will well know, in terms of Leicestershire levels of funding. We are able to use some of the money for transformational resource. So there's a proportion of it that we're able to use for transformational resource. And the remaining is to help us to deliver some of the reforms that are in the document that I've outlined. I think the quick answer at the moment is we don't know whether it's going to be enough. My best guess is it won't be enough, because I think the cost of delivering some of the services that we're being expected to deliver, if we do it properly, will be higher than government grant we've been given. The expectation is that we will use some of the other prevention grant that comes into the local authority that we've had for many years, but the expectation is that we will align some of that funding to the delivery. So we're not expected to deliver all of what's in the paper through the 1.4 million, and I'm optimistic that they'll come with more, maybe hopeful, optimistic with more.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from members? Thank you very much. Thank you for the report. I'd like to move on to item 14, which is a report outlining the local delivery of homes for the Ukraine scheme. This can be found on pages 87 to 96 of the agenda pack. James Fox, Homes for Ukraine project manager, is joining us today to present this report alongside Sharon Cook. Please start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So as outlined on the paper, the purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an overview of the Homes for Ukraine scheme and the support provided locally by the County Council over the past 3 years. The paper gives an overview of the scheme set up nationally to support Ukrainians fleeing the war in Ukraine and seeking sanctuary in the UK in paragraphs 2 to 6. One of those schemes in particular had a particular specific role for the local authority, and that's the Homes for Ukraine sponsorship scheme. That's particularly outlined in paragraph 3. Essentially, people living in the UK could sponsor the visas of Ukrainians looking to seek sanctuary in the UK on the basis they provided them suitable accommodation for 6 months. The guests on the scheme receive a £200 welcome payment to support their transition to life in the UK, and the sponsors could receive thank you payments for up to £350 per month for up to 12 months initially. The local authority had a few roles, particularly around checking accommodation, checking sponsors, ensuring that accommodation would be safe and suitable for Ukrainians arriving, and then administering payments and supporting kind of any ongoing housing needs and support going forward. Specific funding was made available to the local authorities to fund this, and the paper mentions the tariff payments of £10,500 per arrival initially on the scheme, and then funding to cover the cost of the thank you payments paid, and also education grant that was provided. Paragraph 7 to 14 and 15 outline a number of the changes that have happened to the scheme over the past 3 years. So the scheme has been extended year on year and amended on that basis, including some reductions in the tariff funding, changes to thank you payments as well to hosts, and more recently implementation of an extension scheme. That means Ukrainians who've reached the end of their initial 3-year visa can apply for a further extension visa to remain in the country beyond their initial visa period. Paper outlines the local response. We had a large number of people come forward to sponsor Ukrainians in Leicestershire, and the paper outlines that response. As part of the partnership emergency response, we brought together resources to carry out the checks we need to carry out to welcome Ukrainians into the area, particularly setting up a point at East Midlands Airport, working with partners as well. And I think as the scheme continued, as the war in Ukraine continued, it was identified, and with the scale of arrivals, it was determined we needed a dedicated team to support people kind of arriving and remaining in Leicestershire as part of that. And they were in place between November 22 and April 2023. Current position, at the end of March 2025, 1,279 Ukrainians had arrived as sponsors in Leicestershire on the sponsorship scheme. There's been a further 9 in the last 2 months as well. That includes 409 children, and 7 of those children were unaccompanied minors at some point whilst here. There are 2 other schemes. The council hasn't been provided information on the numbers who arrived on the family scheme or the extension scheme, as we didn't have a role in those schemes from the Home Office, so we do not have a number of how many arrived into Leicestershire from that route. At the end of April 2025, So those 1,279 Ukrainians arrived into sponsorship schemes. So at the end, into hosting arrangements. At the end of April 2025, we had 296 Ukrainians, which included 52 children remaining in 166 hosting arrangements across Leicestershire County. The remainder have either moved into private accommodation or returned to Ukraine or other countries or other parts of this country. And at this time, we have no unaccompanied children in our area. They've all either transitioned to adulthood or moved out of our area. Paper then provides a summary, and I guess this is the first time, I should have said, the first time a report on this scheme has come to scrutiny. So we've kind of tried to outline the journey that's happened and the range of support that's been provided over the few years. So it outlines a wide range of support regarding transport, school places, ESOL courses, so English to speakers of other languages, throughout the certainly to support people to settle into this country, to play a part in communities, in the economy, find work and live independently. Paragraphs 28 to 43 outline the work of the support team that has been put in place. I think one of the key areas identified was housing, and in consultation with the district councils, a couple of housing prevention support officers were located in the support team at Leicestershire County Council to help prevent homelessness, as seen as that was one of the key risks on the scheme. And that the paper outlines the work that's been done by the support team, supporting guests to access, to understand and access services locally, to engaging with communities, supporting hosts, supporting guests to find new accommodation where that's been required on the scheme. In response to the needs that we've heard from the community, we set up a specific project to support young people. We were hearing that isolation of Ukrainian teenagers was a particular issue, as they were spread kind of throughout the county, and whilst they were making connections in schools locally, they were feeling isolated because there perhaps weren't any other Ukrainians living in their area. And so as part of that, to hear young Ukrainians' voice and to do some specific work to prevent isolation, paragraphs kind of 40 to 41 outline some of the work that a specific officer, participation officer we employed, has done there, running a number of events for young people, providing them with some input to help them kind of consider their future, to live well in Leicestershire, and to look ahead amidst uncertainty. We actually ran the fourth and final event on Sunday at Bow Manor Hall, and had some things around supporting young people to engage in community activities going forward, to continue looking after their well-being and keep in touch with each other going forward as well. As well as the large number of people coming forward as sponsors, a number of volunteers across the county set up local support groups in local areas, helping Ukrainians to settle. A number of those have been maintained. Some of them they were suitable for a time and don't run anymore, but there are groups in a number of areas of the county that we kind of link with as well. We certainly see community support, and particularly support within the Ukrainian communities, as a key element of support going forwards. And so the council set up a Ukrainian community grant to support local groups, provide that community and peer support to identify local needs and build on that support. As the paper outlines, that grant fund has awarded 41,000 across 14 projects, and particularly around children and young people, well-being and integration and English language. We've done a lot of work around communication as a team, addressing some early difficulties as outlined in paragraph 49 to 52. And supporting host relationships. Hosting has been a key element of preventing homelessness on the scheme for Ukrainians. And one element is a thank you payment. And so I think to support hosting relationships to continue, listening to hosts and guests and continuing that, The council topped up the thank you payments for the months of November to March since the first year of the scheme, since 2022, in recognition of the additional costs for hosts over the winter months there, and continued that top up the last few months. The thank you payment has changed nationally now back to the 350 level. It had previously risen to £500 per month for some guests. It went back to 350 from April 2025, and kind of from considering the risks around homelessness and response to feedback from guests, particularly as well as hosts, we're looking to continue a top up to the thank you payment to £500, which is the level most hosts were receiving last year. But what we're looking to do is not adding a further winter top up as well in this period, and encouraging hosts can ask for a contribution from guests towards bills. So looking at that as part of guests understanding the costs of living independently. The last few paragraphs of the paper outline the forward demand and looking ahead. So the current rules on the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme mean that some Ukrainians we have in Leicestershire could be hosted to October 2028. At this time, it's possible that Ukrainians may be able to apply for further periods of extension to their visas. However, there's no information on that at the moment, and I think a lot depends on what's happening in Ukraine and around Ukraine. The paper outlines kind of the pattern of hosting, or potential pattern of hosting, decrease in paragraph 57. And whilst forward demand is difficult to predict and identify, we are still having some Ukrainians, although fairly small numbers, continuing to arrive. The uncertainty around the ongoing conflict, actually it's anticipated a lower capacity of support will be required from later next year. And yeah, that's the report, Chair, outlining the current work on the scheme, the current work locally. For any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for the report and for your efforts on this. Mr. Pugsley, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I've got no comments on this agenda item. Thank you.
Any member comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Page.
First thing I'd like to say is thank you for all the effort. On behalf of the Ukrainian community, I think it's a testament to how we've stood together. I'm very proud of the record that this county council has got. And I'd also like to say thank you to all the residents that supported Ukrainian families. It's been a very difficult time. I'd also like to know whether all of the costs that have been incurred have been covered, and how the budget has been impacted, if at all, and what that forecast looks like to 28. And could you just clarify for me what is a tariff payment? I didn't think President Trump had actually started incurring, we hadn't incurred costs from President Trump just yet, but could you just explain that for me?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I should have noted it, but point 60 outlines that it is the sponsorship scheme is fully funded through the funding from the government. It was called tariff funding at the start, so kind of 3 years ago in 2022, was the name given was the tariff funding for the Homes Ukraine scheme, and it's based on a one-off payment when a guest arrives, so claimed on a quarterly basis when a guest arrives, a one-off payment that then is covering costs for the checks required and any support required further there. So the costs to date have been fully funded through that funding that's available, and in terms of forecasting, that we would be looking to review our support as necessary within the funding that we've got. So the impact on council budgets broadly has not been anything, and would not be anything beyond that.
Thank you very much. Any further member questions? Thank you. I like Mr. Page's comments. I think it's tremendous what the county has done on this issue, and especially the residents taking people in. I think that's an amazing thing. Thank you very much. We'll move to our final agenda item today, which is item 15, which is a report on Q4 24-25 performance report. This can be found on pages 97 to 104 of your agenda packs. Sharon Cook and Tim Brown will present this report, so please start when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll take the committee through the first part of the report that refers to performance that sits within my area of responsibility, and then I'll hand over to Tim for the education part. Just as way of introduction for committee, this performance or performance reporting and the data that's before you is not the only performance information that we as a department scrutinise. So on a monthly basis, we receive performance on all aspects of the work that's undertaken across the service, and look at some key areas and ensure that we are focusing on any of those areas that aren't performing as they should. So just to give some overview and introduction to it, this report links to those performance indicators that are linked from corporately to our Children and Services departmental plan. So you'll see from paragraph 5 that there are 13 measures that have a national benchmark, and across social care we also benchmark against our statistical neighbours and outstanding authorities so that we can see where we sit. But in Leicestershire, one of those in this quarter, one of those performance indicators is in the top quartile, 4 are in the second, 7 are in the third, and 1's in the bottom quartile. So it's just where we sit for this particular quarter. And although important to look at performance on a quarterly basis, we do monitor it, as I say, on a monthly basis, some of it on a weekly basis, and some of it we look at the year to date at the end of the year, because we do see some spikes and variations, but obviously keep an eye on things for the end of the year. So in relation to helping children in Leicestershire live in safe, stable environments and have secure attachments, paragraph 6 onwards gives you some of that data. So percentage of child protection cases reviewed within timescales for this particular quarter was within 88%. That is slightly less than it was in the last quarter. Those figures, as I say, are monitored on a monthly basis, and the reasons for any reviews not taking place in time, which could be due to the absence of key people. So it's an agreed delay for a review. If, for instance, the family or the young person weren't able to attend, we may agree that it's in the best interest to go slightly over the time to make sure those key people are part of that review. So the detail behind the figures are scrutinised. Paragraph 8, one of the areas we look at is about children who become subject to child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. Ideally, we would hope that any child that's been subject to child protection planning, support would be put in place to minimise that reoccurrence of a child protection issue. The complications around this are that when we look at that figure, and we look at that figure where it stands at the moment at 24.9, we work to a basis that the figure we would hope over the year would be no more than 23-24%. So we understand that sometimes children's circumstances do require a second period of child protection planning, and we have a fundamental oversight of those children, because we wouldn't not go to a child protection plan to keep the percentage down if going to that plan is right for that child. So we have to make sure we're not chasing a figure, we're doing what's right for that child. But we do audit every one of those cases. It can be that a couple of families in a month who've got a large number of children in those families can send that percentage really high for that month. But we audit all those children so we understand what it is that's happened. Were the things that we could have prevented? Is this about a reoccurring theme within that family, or are they going on to a child protection plan for a different reason. So we look at that in some detail and look at the work. What I can say is audits show that these are not children that go off a plan and go straight back on. It's often 2-3 years afterwards that the circumstances have changed, and not wholly, but primarily it's linked to where domestic abuse is a factor within the family setting. Parental mental health and substance misuse are some of those key factors. Percentage of children referred to social care, so that sits at 26.4% in the last quarter. We would aim to get that to about 22%. And again, we look at those cases and look at whether it's a re-referral because we didn't do something right the first time, or whether it's a re-referral in because circumstances have changed and that's required them to come back to our front door. Percentage of assessments completed within 45 days. So we aim to get, wherever possible, those assessments done in 45 days. We accept and acknowledge that there are some complex family circumstances where we make an informed decision to take longer over that assessment. And that could be children with very complex disabilities where it's important to take a bit longer and get all the key people involved in that child around health, etc. But we have a target and we look at those assessments. And then 11 to 14 take you through some of the care leaver performance, and we've already looked at that as part of the reports earlier in the meeting. But to mention paragraph 14, which is those children, our children in care have an annual health assessment that sits at 86.9%. It's increasing quarter on quarter. It includes older young people who refuse to go for health assessments because their peers don't have an annual health assessment and they feel different. So though we encourage them to go, we encourage them to do what's right for their health. Actually attending a health assessment is for some children seen as it's different to their peers, and at that age we know that that's important to be like your peers, so we'd have to take that into account. Paragraphs 15 onwards takes you through some of the, paragraph 15 onwards Tim will come to, but I'll just mention paragraph 19 and 20, which is around the statistics for youth and justice. So the latest report was presented to the Youth and Justice Management Board in March 25. So for this committee, just to note that in that quarter there were 17 first-time entrants into the criminal justice system, and that's a very small increase. It's positive to report that we keep those numbers in the county very low. So I'll now, I'll hand over to Tim and then take any questions at the end.
Thank you, Sharon. So just a brief summary of the education data. If I just start with education, health and care plans, which we've already talked a little bit about, but the issue we're facing across Leicestershire is that since 2014, we've seen 114% increase in the number of EHCPs, and that's compared to 125% nationally. What we are seeing, though, is that we're seeing an increasing number of children with EHCPs in mainstream school, which is a good news story, because it means we're not sending those children to either out of county schools or independent specialist schools as well. So that's a good news story, although the overarching trend is upwards, and that is a worry to us all. But we are expecting some government announcements in the short term around how they propose to increase the inclusivity of the school system so that those children and young people can be educated close to home in mainstream schools. Alongside that, we monitor a range of other factors right through from the Ofsted judgments of primary and secondary schools, because that's the quality of education, and the quality of education has a direct impact on children and people's outcomes, as you would expect. We've got some further work to do in terms of improving the outcomes of primary Ofsted judgments, which are in the third quartile. But I'm really pleased to say that our secondary performance is now the best it's ever been. So that is a really good result during this quarter. Obviously, it does fluctuate a little bit, but the trend is going in the right direction. If you look at paragraph 26 in terms of elective home education, whilst that has increased, it is marginally increased. I mean, you would normally expect to see an increase at this time of year, and that will fall back again between the summer and the start of the autumn term in September. Again, NEET is increasing, and that's to be expected, so nothing unusual there, but we are still below the target, which is again a good news story. The data around permanent exclusions it does look a long time out of date, but that's because the national comparative data is only published at certain intervals. And whilst we know that we are increasing locally, I know anecdotally that's the same nationally as well. But we are unable to report on the national picture at this point in time. And I think probably that's all I need to say at this point. But just to say that we do monitor all those vulnerable children indicators, which are particularly the important ones for us, and intervention is taken in response to this, and it's monitored on a monthly basis by my senior management team. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pugsley, I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. There's nothing I'd like to add to this agenda item.
Mr. Poland?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the report and all the work you've obviously done over the last year. Just a quick question about the electively home educated children. Do we, as a council, monitor the performance, first of all, of those educationally, and second of all, the standard of teaching? Because obviously, otherwise, in a school, you obviously have a set test you can do all the way through, and you can sort of monitor relative to, whereas if you're home educated, unless you've got specific tutors coming in, you might not have the same sort of quality. I can only imagine what my kids' education would be like if I was their main teacher. It'd be great on sport, probably less great on maths. Do you know what I mean? And so it's just, to what extent do we make sure that those kids aren't sort of falling behind by the time they get to exam season?
Yeah, no, great question. If I'm really honest, elective home education is probably the area or one of the areas that keeps me awake most at nights, because you don't know what you can't see. And some parents are doing the most amazing job, but that's not universally the case. The framework that we're allowed to monitor quality is very loose nationally, and the government has got various or has had various amendments put forward to try and strengthen that framework. But in terms of the quality, we can look at the work that's been done, but we have to make a judgment about whether it's appropriate to the lifestyle that family is actually choosing to live. And it's very difficult to make a judgment around whether that is or isn't the case. Certainly for some families, it's what they want to do and it's what they feel is appropriate. For others, it would not be. So I think it's one of those areas where we need to keep challenging. And I've been campaigning on this for 20 plus years because it's an area that really does worry me. And I would encourage you to do the same as members as well.
Thank you very much for that. And just ask a quick follow-up question. So I probably predicting the answer from what you just said, but do we monitor attendance and things like that? I mean, so much as you can have attendance at home school. And the reason behind my thinking is there's an awful lot in the media at the moment, but also historically, about parents being fined when they take children out for a day or for a week. Obviously, if you're home educated, that would then give you an advantage in that regard. And I'm just wondering about sort of parity and fairness across the piece, regardless of whether you're in school or otherwise.
Yeah, no, we don't monitor attendance because once a parent decides to elective home educate, all of that responsibility falls to them. We will obviously support where parents ask for that. So we do have some home visitors who will go and provide that additional support to families and various networks that they can take part in. But it's very limited in terms of our oversight of those particular educational packages. We will obviously write out to families and ask them if they would like advice and support, but we can't insist they do take that. But if we do have concerns around a particular child's education, we can issue what's called a school attendance order, and that will empower the local authority to take action to make sure that child is on the school roll. And again, we monitor more closely those children with special needs and with an EHCP, because it's the parent has to ask our permission if they want to remove a child from a special school to home educate as well. But again, it's a very loose framework, and it is a worry.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. And very comprehensive. I won't expect anything less from an outstanding department. I'll get that one. But again, my question is very similar to James's there. It's around home education, and particularly, obviously, the disadvantages with social integration, but also the main one being the safeguarding issues. It's a real worry for members, but I know it certainly is for you guys as well. What can we as an authority do to minimise the safeguarding issues?
I think a couple of things, and Sharon and Jay may want to contribute to it, but I would certainly campaign that if you're worried about a child not being in education, then you do let us know, and we will take that forward and investigate through either through our social care services or through our inclusion team. And I would really encourage members to campaign nationally on this issue, because I think that we know that education protects, doesn't it? And if a child isn't seen in education, they're probably not being seen elsewhere as well. So they're probably the two key things I would promote. But Sharon and Jay may well have other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important question, isn't it? Because the importance of a child being in a school is more than just the education element, and we know that many of our referrals for children that people are worried about come through schools as well. So, and obviously the duties around the education element of elective home education for local authorities are kind of minimal. You know, once a parent decides to electively home educate a child, it becomes their responsibility, and all of the things that apply in schools don't apply at home. However, our safeguarding responsibility changes whether they're at school or at home. So I think a lot of the work that we've done over the years is around making sure that members of the public, that parents, siblings are aware of safeguarding and of child protection issues. So it would sit with kind of any, as you know, as Tim said, any reporting of children that we are worried about, we would expect to come from communities anyway. Coupled with that, I think there's a couple of things really. One is that the points that Tim's made around the contact we do have with families on home education, we do use to kind of have a look at how confident we are around other areas as well as education. One of the changes that is coming over the horizon, which we noted in one of the previous reports around reform, is that at the moment parents can make a decision to electively home educate their children, and there's very little that we can do to stop that, nor indeed schools as well. What is being implemented, which is really positive, is that for those children who are, and they've not quite defined the cohort yet, originally they're looking at children on a child protection plan or child in need plan, they would have to seek permission from the local authority to home educate their child. And that's a really positive move, because it means that there's a conversation and engagement with the family around electively home educating those children that we would be considering are more vulnerable. So they've not quite shaped what that looks like yet in terms of which cohort of children it will apply to, but that will be a significant change for us in terms of how we then monitor those children. The other area that's being introduced, and again Tim pointed to some of the lobbying that's gone on, and nationally we've been lobbying for a long time to have a national register of children who are not in education, and again that will really help in making sure that we know who the children are and where they are. So we know who our children are, we record them, but having a kind of national register would mean that there's even more scrutiny and safeguarding. But as Tim said, it is an area that we would be concerned about, just because schools are where children get a lot of their learning outside of curriculum as well.
Thank you. I know, Tim, you said that obviously this was a seasonal spike and it's nothing to be concerned about, but certainly since I've been involved in the last 4 years, we have seen a year-on-year slightly increase. Now, initially that was based on COVID and people being used to being educated at home. That we're now 5 years away from that. we're still seeing this rather worrying trend. What can be done? I know you said that we need to lobby nationally, that's fine. But what can be done to highlight this and the concerns that we have to parents so that it can be more informed when they're trying to go through the process of making that choice?
It's a really fine, a very fine balance actually, because the home education lobby is a very large one, and they have very particular views about the intervention of local authorities within this particular cohort. So we have to tread a very thin line between working with our home education communities and not alienating them. What we would certainly do, and we do generally day in, day out, is promote the advantages of the formal educational system and encourage and have access and make sure we have access for those children if they want to go back into the school system as well. We'll also challenge, because there have been stories nationally and locally around schools that encourage parents to home educate a child on occasions, and we will challenge those schools very robustly and take action if we need to. But I think it's all of our work in the local community, working day in, day out with families to make sure they are having access to the best possible education. And for most young people, that's through a school, but not for all. Some achieve absolutely fantastically through home education, others not. So I think it's being discerning around those groups that particularly will benefit from being part of a mainstream environment.
Thank you. Mr. Crook, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, this is probably a good time to be transparent. So I'm a home educator. Can I ask when the last time a policy or programme review on home education was completed?
You mean locally or nationally?
Within the council.
So do you mean in terms of us responding to national legislation and requirements?
The umbrella of home education.
So I guess the quick answer is we are continuously reviewing how we deliver our requirements around home education. And I think one of the challenges is that we are limited in our both resource and responsibilities around home education. Elective home education is a parental choice, and it becomes the responsibility of the parent the minute they home educate. We have a number of duties, but minimal duties in terms of what that looks like. So in terms of a review of policy, we follow the national policy. So we won't review our policy, we follow the national policy, sorry. However, we have continually looked at what good would look like in terms of our support within the confines of the resource that we have to deliver it. So we've looked at, we've had to increase the number of officers in the team just to do the yearly visits that we're required to do. We've linked the team with our other children missing education teams. We've done a whole raft of different bits of work. So I guess we're continually reviewing how we offer, but the policy is set nationally in terms of what we have to deliver. The new legislation that's coming over the horizon will mean that we're going to have to completely relook again at the resource that we've got within that bit of the team, as well as some of the responsibilities we take on, because we will need to do more. So the policy comes nationally, so we don't set the policy locally, but we kind of continue to review how we deliver it to make sure that we can keep up with some of the numbers. And you know, as Mr. Smith said, particularly post-COVID, the numbers increased significantly, which meant we had to really quickly step up our ability to do those annual visits as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, was it 1,250 odd children within the county? It's a considerable number. I do believe it's going to carry on growing. I think it might be an idea we do have a little look at this within the council. There's a lot of misinformation, and on item 27, I think it was, if I could ask where that data is from, and the factors leading towards people choosing to home educate. That doesn't ring true from my understanding. So if I could ask where that information was gathered from, please.
Yeah, so I think the points you're making are really, really important ones, and we need to remember that there are parents who choose to electively home educate their children for absolutely the right reasons, and those children do really, really well. We know that. Where we're worried is where decisions are made about home educated children that may not be in the best interest of the child, and that's not all of those children. You know, we know home education works well. When a parent decides to home educate their child, they need to inform the local authority, and it's at that point we ask them why. You know, what's behind your decision. We ask the same questions when parents want to move their child between schools as well. So we ask the question. So the information that we've detailed within paragraph 27 pull out some of those reasons. I think we need to update the kind of post-pandemic narrative, because we know that the pandemic significantly impacted the contract that parents and schools had, which meant that parents were more happy to not have their children in school. So the pandemic changed the contract relationship. That didn't impact those that were home educated anyway. They stayed anyway. So what this paragraph is referring to is that since the pandemic, the kind of contract between school and home has shifted, because we were given permission to not have our children in school, and that never happened in the history of schooling. So I think what we're referring to in that is the legacy of that shift in contract, and the fact that parents were given permission to not send their children in meant that it's almost changed the way in which schools viewed and the compulsory of school. So I think you're right, we need to do some more work around you know, kind of benefits of formal education, the benefits of attending school, you know, where home education works, what it's right for, and all of that to kind of reset some of that relationship around expectations of children attending.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone's questions today. It's been a really good meeting. I'd like to move on to item 16, which is the date for the next meeting, and that is scheduled to take place on the 2nd of September 2025. And final item 17, there is no urgent items. Again, I'd like to thank every single person for asking questions, the officers for answering the reports. And yeah, thank you very much, and see you in September. Thank you.